it's interesting. If you win an NCAA national title, it's worth 100 Learfield Cup points. And a fun fact is that what 100 Learfield Cup points offer you is if you were ranked number two, I think it was number 264 in the Division I Learfield Cup standings. 100 points jumped 100 schools. You can make a 100 school jump by just getting 100 points. So again, if you're a Division I athletic director out there, and you would like to move your athletic department forward on those Learfield Cup point standings, triathlon's a pretty good way to do that.
And that's our clip to
Yeah.
promote this conversation right
That's
there.
the sales pitch right there. That's the sales pitch.
Today on the spotlight, we have Queen's University head coach Sonni Dyer, 2021 Division II Coach of the Year, and six-time NCAA, four-time club national champion team head coach. Welcome to the spotlight today, Coach.
Thank you very much, Brian. Very glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. Looking forward to chatting with you today and learn a little bit more about what you've done. I think the most exciting thing that's come out at Charlotte here this last year is the transition of your program from Division II to Division I.
Yeah, very excited about that. It was something that for the total athletic department wide approach to everything, that it just fit in line with what the institution wants to do as being, the only Division I program now inside of the city limits of a major metro market like Charlotte. So for us in the triathlon world, it wasn't a far leap for us because of our competitiveness up to this point. But there's some more travel for some of our other programs inside the athletic department as far as that's concerned. So far all good, and we're handling it quite well. I mean, and even in men's basketball, we're doing very well in the ASUN conference. So it's been a good jump.
Well, I think you're being a little humble and hit the last national championship in the fall. You very nearly took the overall national championship, finishing second to six-time Division I champion Arizona State. What was that like for your athletes?
It was an exciting day. I don't think we've never had as exciting an NCAA triathlon in the young history of our sport. So just to be a part of that and to be able to push them the way that we did, I was asked before the race, who's going to win, and one of the things that I said in my reply was, I don't know whether it would be us or it would be ASU, but what I do know is that the sport of triathlon would win. And I think that was definitely accomplished in Tempe on November the 12th.
The final margin was single digits. And
Yeah.
at one point during the race, I recall you guys, I think it was kind of a push. I mean, if the race had stopped short of the run finish, you guys were right there.
Yeah.
So that had to be pretty exciting. What do you think will make the difference? Is it an athlete preparation or team tactics? What do you think would make the difference moving forward as you guys prepare to kind of rematch later this spring or even next fall?
Obviously, I think the difference maker for us is going to be to get all eligible athletes healthy, because we had two key injuries that took two individuals who would have been in that lead pack out of the equation. And so when you take those top swimmers out of the equation, that puts the rest of your squad completely on the chase, which we did, and we chased very well. But we just came up a little short on the run.
It was an exciting race though, and just to watch your athletes make that jump. And as coaches, we can talk all we want about really them just being human beings over there, regardless of the uniform they're wearing. But young athletes, you're going to default to being a little intimidated. You got that big red school over there. And even though it has nothing to do with the 7-on-7 on race day, an
Yeah.
80,000 student school. And I think last I saw, Queens was about 1,600 students.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I think another piece of it is getting 1 year older and 1 year wiser. Out of our five scores at the national championships, three of them were freshmen. So, just one more year under their belt, one more year at a national championship where they're not kind of starstruck by the whole magnitude of the thing the day that they fly into Tempe, you know what I mean? Or into Phoenix. So, just a little bit more poise, that kind of thing. So, and honestly, too, I think really one of the things that it will take for us is to have some mid-year, some regular season test. I said to the team at the very beginning of the year, I said, our biggest challenge is going to be is that we are in the East, and in the West, we have ASU, South Dakota, Denver, San Francisco. So everybody that could push you from a competitive standpoint, you're not going to race until the national championships. And while you're going to kind of have your way and run through the East, that's not a good thing. And I told them that before our very first practice of the year. And boy, did that come out to I heard Nick Saban say the other night in his in his assessment of the national championship football game, the last thing you ever want is for your team to play substandard or not play well and then win the game.
Hmm. I
Because
heard
then what do you tell them and how do you connect with them about what they've got to do to change and adapt and adjust and that kind of thing? And so that was a concern of mine very early on. And quite frankly, in in the regular season, we're going to have to probably get on a plane and kind of know what we don't know before we get there.
at one point, it wasn't that long ago when the North Carolina region had all three team trophies, and you would have looked at your regional affiliation as a strength.
Yeah,
And and now you're looking at almost the exact opposite by being isolated. Although there's certainly a conversation to be had about being an unknown quantity going into nationals.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
So
don't, because we are an eight, we're working on year eight here. We were the very first grant funded team. We were the team that after we signed on, we brought on another six or seven teams in the NCAA Triathlon that really kind of initiated the launch. So it's not as though, honestly, even as a Division two, we had never finished outside of the top three among Division one teams. So it's not as though we were unknown, but at the same time, now we're Division one, and that comes with it a whole different level of competitiveness and quite frankly, expectation on our part too. It's a good thing, but it's still a challenge nonetheless.
your team for a long time has cast a long shadow across the entire NCAA. People know the strength of your program, the depth of your program. I think one of the things that I've always found impressive and unique is your approach to uh, race planning,
Mhm.
your team tactics. How do you go about in installing that? Does that start in the recruiting process? Is that something that begins when they arrive on campus and begin team practices? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it absolutely begins in the recruiting process because one of the things that I try to do in assessing key pieces and key individuals in our program is do they have a we before me mentality? Because at the end of the day, you know, um, what I want to do is I tell them from the get go, you have 9 months every year to race for yourself. You have 3 months out of the year where we're racing for one another, you know, and I approach it from a bike racing standpoint because that was my professional background. I know a lot of coaches come from a swim coaching background or a track and cross country running background, and I have those pieces, to my resume as well. But draft legal triathlon is a team sport, and you better be willing to sacrifice your own goals for the team goals. And so that really begins not only in recruiting, but from day one how we approach the races and how we talk about different scenarios in races and what the decision making is. So how we approach that as a team is, that's very important to what we do, and the way that we kind of collectively, use some of those tactics and those strategies on race day.
A standalone D2 race, you're going to come out with the lead swimmers. Your athletes historically have been either in the lead pack where they're having to make decisions about attacking or holding back a little bit. But when you made the transition, now suddenly you're facing swimmers that are coming out
Yeah.
well under 10 minutes, and you're in a position where you do have to make some decisions about bridging. How's your approach to athlete development and race prep in general shifted since you made the transition?
Well, I mean, if you're gonna, tactically, if you're gonna mitigate any swim losses or any swim margin, page and working and pulling together once you get on the bike. You know, what we knew going into the national championship is that we were the best running team in triathlon. What we also knew is that Arizona State, San Francisco, Denver, South Dakota, they're all very, very good swimming teams. So if we don't utilize one another, by the time we get on the bike, and we don't practice that, and we don't, before you hit the gas and go on the bike, you got to turn around and you got to count five teammates, you know? Uh, and if you can do that and you can get five people to the front of the race, then you're in a position to use your strength. And that for us is the run. So, uh, I in the weeks before the national championships, I put three scenarios up on a whiteboard. And I said, in every single one of these scenarios, we're going to be chasing on the bike. That's going to be what we do. And of course, that's exactly what we had to do, to get back to the front end of the race and bring it to the run. So, that's not to say that we're not really good at swim development, but from my recruiting standpoint, I there's a certain mold that I'm looking for in athletes, and that is to finish the race.
Having been kind of following a cross country scoring model for years, moving to a new scoring model this year, how did that change the game for you?
Well, I mean, one thing you've got to understand is that every single season, injuries are also inevitable. And so you've got to build the team accordingly, because if one person goes down, two people go down. We had an individual with a broken foot this year, an individual, different things. You'd better have somebody that can come in and step in so that your November is not dependent on injuries that may occur in September or October. You know what I mean? So you got to build depth. I mean, if cross country, collegiate cross country teaches us anything, it's you got to build depth.
Would you agree that the new scoring model, which now sort of top down assigns points to finishing places, allows for several scenarios? Several different teams could potentially have success depending on what their funding model is or their approach to recruiting. Maybe go all in on a few high performance athletes versus your approach, which has always been to develop depth in your roster. Um,
Yeah, I don't.
what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think you can field a very good team with two, three, four hitters on your squad, but yeah, I don't think you're going to win a national championship without five solid individuals who have the capacity to finish in the top 20 to 25 of the race. It's just, you know, to have, and what seems to be happening in our sport is that the more teams that enter, I mean, next year we have Duquesne entering, we have Arizona entering, we have TCU entering. The more players there are entering the space, the more displacement there's going to be in the top 10 and in the top 20 of very, very good athletes. The more displacement there is, the more it favors that you really need to be deep now, you know? So from our standpoint, you've got to really, you think about it. If your number one or your number two has a bad day, they're going to lose one, two, maybe 3 points. If your number 4 and number 5 have a bad day, you might lose 20, 25 points, you know?
Right.
So I think with as the as more schools come in, as the fields get more competent, more deep, your team's got to reflect that and get more deep as well.
Yeah, it's certainly it's an interesting conversation. If I'm a budget limited startup, not fully funded, and I have an opportunity to grab that 75 points at the front of the race and potentially position for a team trophy, even if we're just talking about sneaking onto that third spot of the podium. There's some argument for that. If you're trying to
Yeah,
make a splash and come out and develop some brand recognition as a new
yeah,
startup, because it's certainly going to be tough to come out and compete for a team championship with a young squad against seasoned programs like what you've developed at Queens and ASU and at TCU. They're going to be launching as a new team, but they've had an entire year of development under their belts as well. So
right.
it
Well, yeah, and the other piece that we have happening as well is not only do we have Duquesne and Arizona and TCU coming on board, but what the NCAA model that we've got to start working towards as a championship sport is that D1 and D2 and D3 will be racing together. So now you're also adding in the top D2 teams into this mix as well. So it's going to get deeper. The field's going to get deeper really, really quick. You know.
That's interesting. As you said that, I hadn't thought of this before, so excuse me if this sounds out of left field. But if I'm a D2 or a D3 and I want to make a splash, maybe I do go all in on that front runner, get that we used to call in cross country the low stick,
Yeah.
who can finish up front, and now maybe I could put a D3 team in the top 5 or 8 overall in that aggregate race. And I think it's interesting, as a coach, one of the things that we do is try to find the path to success for our roster,
Yeah.
for our athletes. And the game, the format with the evolutions we've seen from cross country scoring to what I would consider to be more like track and field, where you assign the points. Um, it's been interesting because then you start to reevaluate your approach and
Yeah.
try to create some efficiencies in there so your team can be successful. So that's certainly a fun conversation. One of your roles in the NCAA movement is vice president of the CTCA, or Coaches Triathlon Coaches Association, Collegiate Triathlon Coaches Association. Um, and you served as a D2 rep and most recently as the vice president. So you have some unique insights into the conversations about where the sport is at, going all the way back to the very beginning and up to where things are now and where it needs to go. What do you foresee is the natural next step in this? What does collegiate triathlon from the NCAA side need to do to really position itself to make that jump to championship status?
I would say that's a great question because we're always trying to predict what next so that we can kind of prepare in the moment for now. I would think one of the milestones that we've just recently hit is if you go back 2 years, 3 years, even coming through the pandemic, what we had was a lot of D2 schools. Like the majority of our 40, let's say, were D2 schools, a lot of D3 schools. And then I think maybe at one point we had 5, 6, 7 Division 1 schools, and that wasn't a lot. Now, what we seem to have, will have next year is we're probably going to have, in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 on the D1 start, and then another, you know, so it's the divisional representation is now much more even because we're now getting the TCUs and the Arizonas and the Duquesnes that are coming in to the sport. So, and I think that's exactly what we need is we need to project and to show that we're very soon going to enter this assessment period by which we go from emerging sport to a championship sport.
I think most people initially would make an assumption because the sport of triathlon, there are some serious barriers to entry from an investment standpoint for an
Yeah.
individual participating in the sport. How do you see that being different for an institution trying to jump into collegiate triathlon?
Well, it's interesting. It would be really easy to look at things like bikes and wetsuits and, that kind of thing, and assess our cost or our expensiveness on those things. Actually, if you think about it, what costs most in terms of an operational budget is travel, is getting individuals around to from place to place to place, and then competing, because you're paying for entry fees and hotels and flights and food and bus transport and bike transport, and, et cetera, et cetera. And for us, if you look at all of the NCAA women's sports and you look at the minimum number of competitions, our minimum number of competitions in the sport of triathlon is four. Four. There's not another sport that has, I think, less than 6 or 8 minimum number of competitions. Our maximum number of competitions is 6. So if your biggest, line item, if you will, is travel, sucking money out of your operational budget, um, we're actually a very good deal because you're only moving the team around 4 to 6 times a year. And some of those can be, local races and regular season races that are done on campus with nearby partners. And as we get in more schools, that's going to scale because more schools are going to be in a neighborhood where races to there's races to compete at that are much more cost effective. You know what I mean? So from a cost standpoint, on the if you're an athletic director, we're actually a very, very good deal. The other thing that's very appealing, I think, in moving us from an emerging sport to a championship sport is GPA. I mean, our women's team GPA is once again over 3.8 this past semester. Out of 13 women on our roster, 6 of them had a 4.0. 6 out of 13 had a 4.0. That doesn't happen in athletic departments. You don't get 40 to 45% of a team get a 4.0. So again, if you're an athletic department and you're assessing, whether I want to bring on, sport A, women's lacrosse, or sport B, women's rugby, or women's triathlon, or women's wrestling, we have a lot of pluses, for us because what we offer in terms of a return on investment, what you get in GPA, what you get in competitiveness versus what it costs in very minimal facilities and what it costs in terms of minimal travel. Here's another: days missed, classes missed, class times missed. If I'm a volleyball team or a basketball team, and I'm going to be missing some classes when I have a Wednesday night game, a Thursday night game, a Tuesday night game, that kind of stuff. We have some students that miss classes, and then they got a 20-game season. There's some classes missed there. I think that this year, or the entire semester, maybe our team missed two days of classes, and that was to travel to the national championship. So from an academic standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from what an athletic department gets versus what they invest in, triathlon, in my opinion, and I'm biased, triathlon's it's got a lot of positives and pluses to it. And so what we're beginning to see is the D1s, fill up. We're getting to see more D2s that are really serious about the sport come in, and very competitive D2s as well. D3 is vibrant. There's some really good coaching happening even in the D3 ranks and things like that. We're now at 40 institutions. We're going to soon be on our way through that assessment process by which we're a championship sport. So,
And hopefully we'll see some more interest from the big Power Five name brand schools that will want to get on board as we get to the other side. Certainly, some waiting on the sidelines to let the smaller institutions do the heavy lifting while everything is built out.
and especially as then they recognize that Learfield Cups become on offer. You know,
Right.
uh, I did. It's interesting. If you win an NCAA national title, it's worth 100 Learfield Cup points. And a fun fact is that what 100 Learfield Cup points offer you is if you were ranked number two, I think it was number 264 in the Division I Learfield Cup standings. 100 points jumped 100 schools. You can make a 100 school jump by just getting 100 points. So again, if you're a Division I athletic director out there, and you would like to move your athletic department forward on those Learfield Cup point standings, triathlon's a pretty good way to do that.
And that's our clip to
Yeah.
promote this conversation right
That's
there.
the sales pitch right there. That's the sales pitch.
I don't want to wrap this conversation up without touching on a couple of things that you've accomplished that I'm curious to hear your perspective on. Queen's University is the only team that's ever knocked off Arizona State at East Regionals just a few years ago, and of course you were close again this year at Nationals.
Well, 6 years ago. So, but yeah, 2016 seems
Okay.
like 2 years ago, but yeah.
I think with COVID, we've all sort of lost
Yeah,
a few years in our
yeah,
mind. It seems not that long ago, but that's an incredible sort of mark on your program's resume. And it's something that I think is good for the sport to see that sort of competition. I see it sort of coming back with the expansion of programs at the highest level, the inclusion of more aspirational athletes that are coming into the NCAA mission who potentially have eyes on post collegiate careers.
yeah.
You also can proudly claim the only graduate to represent their national governing body at the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what it's like to develop athletes, not only who are trying to win a collegiate national championship, but also you're trying to prepare them for what lies beyond. And a lot of us are focused on trying to develop young people who are ready to transition and be successful in life after college, but you're specifically seeing more and more of your roster preparing for a professional athletic life beyond college. Speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, we pride ourselves on an elite developmental program, and not just on our women's side, but also on our men's club side as well. And last a couple examples last year, we had an All-American swimmer come to us just before COVID, and last year he went 347 in a 70.3. Became a pro triathlete and raced at Long Course Worlds this past year. So so it really we have a saying that they're all going to be pro in something else one day. So graduating with that degree is super important, but at the same time, we want to provide that intermediary step that allows them to continue to pursue their goals within the sport, long after they've left Queens. It's really cool because we have some really high profile, I guess from my standpoint, they're still high profile U25 alumni, in our program. I mean, I got a text about a sponsorship question from Annabelle Knoll last week. The day that, we got on November 12th, when we got second to ASU by 9 points, I got a text from Teresa Zamadianova, who that very day had gotten a top 10 in a World Cup in Chile. So to have our alumni, connecting and still following our team, to me, what our goal, what we're trying to do is, it's tassels, it's titles, and it's traditions. You know what I mean? And I didn't make that up. I completely stole that from an athletic director press conference that I watched. So tassels, titles, and traditions. And so the tassels, I mean, I cry every May because I've got to spend 3 or 4 years with these kids, and then I get to see them walk across the stage, and I realize that our time together, on a daily basis is done, and it's kind of, you're setting them free into the world, right? And it's always bittersweet, but that's our job, right? titles, that's what we try to do. And then, but really, what makes it so worthwhile are the traditions. You know what I mean? And the culture that we have inside of our team, which is team first, that culture of we, that you know that just gets handed down to the next group, to the next group, and to the next group. And so it really is about really trying to create a tradition of excellence within your program. You know.
It'll be interesting to see if this sport evolves in the same vein as track and field, with potentially some post collegiate programs on campus for our emerging elite athletes,
Yeah.
or if there becomes any sort of an incubator for those aspirational sub elite athletes as they graduate from our programs. But that's another exciting possibility down the road.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when those athletes are still in your program and you're having to juggle things like, you know, some of these trips to Conti Cups,
Yeah.
or athletes who have obligations to their NGBs, for World Triathlon racing commitments. How do you navigate that?
Well, really, the very first consideration when they come to me and they say, I have this race on this weekend and blah, 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 it has nothing to do with swim, bike, run, or competition. Um, my first question is how you doing in your classes? What's your GPA? And how your professor's going to feel about this? That's the really, that's really the first thing, because ultimately those professors are going to have to sign off on this. So, and now, most of our kids, again, 4.0, 3.5, 3.8. I mean, that's our team GPA. More often than not, that kid is going to be able to, participate in a race, going through all the proper NCAA channels to get permission to compete, as long as they're not on a team, compete as an individual for their national team, that kind of thing. But you know, I have no problem with them going and competing outside of a Queen's jersey, as long as it's not a regional championship or a national championship. If it's a regular season race, by all means, go out there and promote the Queen's brand internationally. Please, please do that. Do great things. Do great things. When you're wearing, your your home country's jersey. By all means, I encourage that.
I think that what you touched upon is probably the most significant differentiation between athletes that choose to go the collegiate route versus the elite squad or the development squad route, the progress towards degree, and maintaining that balance in their schoolwork, their campus commitments, and then their aspirations as an athlete.
Yeah,
But also, I found in talking to international recruits, that's the focal appeal,
yeah,
almost to a person, when you ask them why they want to make that jump to the U.S. if they're an international athlete. It's because of the opportunity to pursue both
yeah.
simultaneously. So I think that more and more coaches, as they figure out how to navigate that,
Hmm.
are going to have more and more highly capable, program changing, high impact athletes that they'll choose to join their roster. So
Yeah.
hopefully more of our NCAA coaches will figure that out as well.
Yeah, and
Uh,
I think there is definitely a path for NCAA programs to kind of begin to you know go into that space where we have programs that are Olympic developmental and elite developmental pipelines, much like track and field has done, much like swimming has done. I mean, there's definitely space for that as well.
okay, here's the big question. I'm interested in, as a personal friend, what do you do to take your coaching to the next level? If most people have won 10 team titles, they've been recognized as coach of the year. They're deep into their coaching journey. That constant pursuit of personal evolution. There's fewer and fewer motivators. The low hanging fruits all been harvested. What do you do as a coach now to continue to evolve and get better?
I think, I learned, what makes us better are our competitors. So I try to learn as much as I can from our competitors in terms of recruiting, in terms of, swim coaching, in terms of travel to races, in terms of helping kids set up class schedules and expectations and things like that. Uh, nothing teaches you more than getting second place, right? So, because then you've got you're highly motivated to learn. Okay, what could I have done better here? How could I have prepared our team better here? And when I say prepare our team, I don't necessarily mean swim, bike, run. How can I onboard? This past year we had 13 on our roster. 8 were freshmen. You know, what's a better way for me to onboard 8 freshmen when I fully know somebody's going to get injured in September, October, and we're going to be relying on one of those freshmen in November. You know what I mean? So, I'm always trying to be a sponge. And fortunately, at Queens, my mentor and my direct report is Jeff Dugdale, and he's won 14 national Division II swim titles. His program in their first year as Division One is a top 20 Division One swim program in the country. And so his mentor was David Marsh, who's the U.S. Women's Olympic team coach. So I'm a bit fortunate in that my coaching lineage comes from the branch off of that tree, because I'm not trying to make it up as I go. I have the opportunity to bounce ideas and get insight and get mentorship on the front end here. And I've really had that since day one, which has always made this such a good situation for me here at Queens, because anything that I'm doing, literally, has been done before in swimming at Queens.
Well, I think you may see yourself as a branch of a distinguished coaching tree, but I think that in the years to come, we're going to see what you've spawned, and we're going to see your own coaching tree start to impact our sport. And that's exciting. Thank you very much for taking the time to chat today. I always enjoy our conversations. To take this opportunity to record one and share them with other people, I hope others get some entertainment and maybe a little information that they can ponder and help to develop their own craft and their own programs.
Enjoyed it, Brian. Thank you very much.
All right. Take care and have a great day.